Hey everyone, good evening. Welcome to tonight's conversation. As always, I can't tell who's online unless you comment. So if you'd like to say hello, say hello. And as always, feel free to chime in with your insights and your questions. I really do love when you join into the conversation. So yeah, feel free to do that at any time. Tonight is a deep one. It's about loneliness, and this is something that like almost no one likes to talk about except for me. I mean, I can't say that I like talking about it. I wish that it wasn't a thing that we had to experience as humans. But I like to talk about it because it's helpful to dissect it and come up with strategies, not only to prevent it, but also to cope with it when it's present in our lives. So that's what tonight's discussion is going to be about. It's going to be about diving into, what loneliness is, the dangers of it, the importance of community and building strong social bonds, and if you've already built them, strengthening them. So yeah, that is the premise of tonight's discussion, the antidotes to loneliness. And of course, we're going to talk about what the antidotes to loneliness are. And there's a lot of different options that you can try out. So again, feel free to ask questions. As always, offer insights. I'm here for you tonight. I'm got some things to offer, but ultimately I really just want to serve you guys. Just going to read a couple comments here. Ryan Brown says, good evening. Jamal Lloyd says, looking forward to this, Janey. I think this is something everyone deals with from time to time, especially over the last 2 weeks or 20 months. Yeah. Yep. At this point, I almost don't even like mentioning, given the circumstance for the past 2 years, but it's a reality. It's, unfortunately, it's still a reality in a lot of ways. And it's affecting us still, but yeah, sometimes I just want to forget that this happened. You can also argue like there's a lot of ways it could have contributed to well-being and, changing habits and making better decisions in life. Whereas maybe before we might've been on autopilot. So there's good and bad, but yeah, I feel like everyone's just over the C word at this point, or the P word. So I almost don't even like to mention it, but it's very relevant. And, you can't ignore what's real. So having said that, having given the intro, those of you who know me. If you don't know me, you can check me out after this discussion. But what's important right now is that we dive into this material, the antidotes to loneliness. So let's first start. Hi, Jeremy. So good to have you on here, my friend. Let's first dive into what is loneliness, the definition. So I'll first start by saying that loneliness and being alone are two different things. One can be alone and not feel lonely. Being alone actually goes along with the willingness to be alone, whereas being lonely often goes with the unwillingness to be alone. So there's a distinct difference there, and that's actually kind of an easy way to remember it. Many people who decide to be alone or spend time alone, there's a lot of liberation that can be found there, a lot of peace and connectedness to self. So it doesn't mean you're lonely when you're, just because you're alone. Loneliness is also not to be confused with social anxiety or antisocial behavior or introversion. Those things can lead to loneliness, but ultimately they're not the same things. And I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole because it's a much longer discussion to sort of describe the differences between social anxiety and introversion and things like that. None of those things being negative, just a different conversation for another time. So just like we can be alone and not feel lonely, we can also be with others and feel lonely. This can be sort of presented by way of feeling shy or feeling misunderstood or judged or feeling ignored. Again, just because we're with others doesn't mean that we're not lonely. And I would also add that, and we're going to get into sort of the specifics of us being a social species and, essentially the need for connection based on that. But the need for connection goes along with the need for belonging. And unfortunately, people tend to sacrifice who they really are just to fit in with a certain group that they admire or that they want to be a part of. That's different than belonging. Belonging is the acceptance of who you truly are. So you can belong to yourself and you can belong to a group. But ultimately, belonging is truly belonging. It's this acceptance of you for who you truly are. Whereas fitting in is you've contorted yourself in some way and potentially abandoned your values and abandoned who you truly are to sort of fit the mold of some group or that particular group's expectations. And that's a hugely relevant topic based on just our social dynamics as a human species in general. Also another huge conversation, but I just wanted to kind of point that out, that this feeling of loneliness that we get when we're with others can often be incited by the fact that potentially the others that we're with they don't fully know us, or they haven't accepted us for who we truly are. And therefore we don't actually belong with them. We've just sort of changed ourselves to fit in with them. And in that, we're more susceptible to social pressure and abandoning our needs and abandoning our values. And really no good can come from that. So I talked a lot about that last week. You can check out last week's episode if you'd like to get more into that, or of course, ask any questions here tonight. So you can be lonely when you're with people, and you cannot be lonely when you're alone. Ultimately, the definition of loneliness comes down to unmet needs socially. And those unmet needs socially are according to the quality of relationships as well as the quantity. And the quantity connects to the amount of times you are able to connect within quality relationships, and the amount of quality relationships that you have that you can connect to most often. So quality and quantity matter when it comes to quality, when it comes to social connectedness. So when we have unmet needs socially, that can lead to loneliness. And that's ultimately at least one definition that I found in one of the university courses that I'm taking right now that pertains to resilience and mental health. So it's unmet social needs. It's this sense of disconnection from others. It also shows up as a disconnection from ourself. And I'm going to talk about how we can find both connection with others and with ourselves. But it can show up both physically and emotionally. So people describe the experience of loneliness physically and emotionally. Emotionally, it can look like lack of energy. It can show up as anger even. And underneath those feelings, anxiety as well, underneath those feelings is deep sadness. So sadness is sort of at the core of the emotional experience, even if there's these other emotions on top of that sadness, like anger and lack of energy, etc. Physical symptoms of loneliness have actually been described as the feeling of being cold or empty or hungry, or this deep, innate physical sense of lack. So it's interesting, to kind of break it down that way, because when we find ourselves in the experience of loneliness, to soothe it, we kind of want to ask ourselves both questions. We want to ask ourselves, is what I need right now social emotional connection? So affirmation, validation, written or spoken, bonding, love, right? Is what I need emotional, or is what I need physical? Like, do I need to be touched? Do I need contact? Do I need hugs? Or do I need both? Do I need both emotional and physical connectedness with others? There's no right or wrong answer to that, but it is a relevant question to ask so that you're meeting all of your needs. I mean, if you are let's say if you're involved with someone, let's say you're dating someone and they're amazing at connecting intellectually, but they never touch you, that potentially is going to show up as loneliness in you after some time if your needs are to be touched by your loved ones. So very, very relevant two questions to ask yourself when you're experiencing loneliness. And it also helps you to identify, what that sort of the red flags of that experience. Like, you can start to get the sense of the pattern physically and emotionally that shows up in you when you experience loneliness. So you get to know yourself better. So receiving these things, receiving these physical needs and emotional needs from others, it gives us a sense of belonging to a social world. And I'm going to share a little personal loneliness story to help, solidify this discussion and bring more understanding to it. So for a lot of my life, I was one of those people that claimed to be totally self-reliant and didn't need anybody. Like I was one of those people that said, I don't need people. I just don't. All I want to do is focus on my career and like crush it. That's it. That's all I'm here to do. And actually, there's a funny story that my mom sometimes brings up of when I was in kindergarten. She said when she dropped me off, the kids were all hanging up their coats on hooks. And this was like the first day of kindergarten or something. And I was too small. Like, I was a very petite kid and I was too small to reach. And these bigger kids or taller kids tried to help me put my coat on the hook. And she claims that I turned to them and said, I can do it myself. And I don't know if I ended up hanging the coat on the hook or not. But in a nutshell, that was sort of my belief. And perhaps as a kid, maybe that was the way I needed to be to survive. I mean, like I said, I was very small, and to protect myself, maybe I needed to believe that I could do everything on my own and I could do it myself. And I wanted to be independent and I wanted to be self-reliant. I'm just looking at Alex chiming in with her laughter. It's because she knows me as an adult and she's probably reflecting on adult versions of that story, which is really amazing. So yeah, that was sort of my modus operandi, and throughout life. And eventually, as an adult, I realized that my tendency for hyper independence was actually just a defense. My tendency for hyper independence was a defense against rejection, likely so that I didn't end up lonely. And crisis after crisis hit in my, I would say my late 20s, maybe it was early 30s, but sort of late 20s, early 30s, there was just all the crises that came flying at me like poop just in fan. And I realized how alone I felt, and not alone in a liberated sense, alone in a deeply lonely sense. I had exhausted the relationships that I did have in my life. And there was only so much therapy I could pay for week to week. And I just felt like I got to a place where I felt like I didn't belong on earth anymore. Like, it wasn't even this feeling of I don't belong to a group. It's like, I don't even belong here. Like, where is my place? And not only that, but like, yeah, I have no one. And, it wasn't no one. I had some people, but there's only so much you can kind of rely on people, one person for, or two, like a couple of friends for, right? And so, like I said, I kind of exhausted those relationships. Anyway, so I got to this deep place of loneliness, and it was devastating to my mental health. It lasted for a few years, and kind of went up and down. But at its worst, like at the place where I was having some very scary thoughts, I found a community. And, I'm going to get into the importance of community and how that can turn your life around. But I want to sort of stay on the track of loneliness for now so that we can just really understand the dangers of it. So that was an anecdotal sort of position on, this topic. But let's dive into some data now. This is a beautiful quote by Teal Swan. So loneliness is it's a primary source of suffering across the globe. Like, this is now not a new or niche sort of, let's call it an illness, right? It's a source of suffering across the globe, and more people are coming out with it, and there's more and more studies being done. Anyway, Teal Swan, in her book The Anatomy of Loneliness, says loneliness never seems adequate to describe the torment of starvation for closeness. That's, yeah. Mic drop. I can't even really add to that. It's just a beautifully poetic way of solidifying the feeling of loneliness. But yeah, let's definitely get into some data so that we can understand how dangerous it is, because it doesn't just hurt. It also kills. So we need social connection in one way or another, physical, emotional. And if we don't get that, we could be at risk of death. So let's get into what Brene Brown says. I'm going to just read a couple comments here. Alex was laughing at me because of my childhood coat hanging story. And then she also says, my hyper independence was a defense. She was quoting me there, and she says, I can relate to this. Yeah. Oh, say the quote one more time. Okay, cool. I'll say that Teal Swan quote one more time. So Teal Swan in The Anatomy of Loneliness says, loneliness never seems adequate to describe the torment of starvation for closeness. Yep. 100%. Now, Brene Brown also, I pulled a quote from her. She gave a speech at, it was some church. I actually have the reference. I can put it in the description below the YouTube posting. Anyway, I posted, so this is a quote from that speech, which was an epic speech, and I highly recommend it if I could just remember the name of it. She says, loneliness is at an all-time high and has become a health epidemic. So this is mimicking my earlier claims of loneliness being a global source of suffering, or a source of suffering globally. So she says, loneliness is at an all-time high and has become a health epidemic. It's a greater predictor of early death than smoking, obesity, and excessive drinking. Loneliness absolutely kills you. That's Dr. Brene Brown, who's a vulnerability and shame researcher, also a Ph.D., also an author, also just a hero. She's just done such great work on the subject of shame and vulnerability and loneliness, which coincide, and we're definitely going to get into why. So, okay, loneliness kills. Let's talk about that. One way that it can kill is literally through disease. I pulled a quote from Dr. Murthy, there's actually, if you literally like type this quote in Google, you can find several articles that reference this quote that he gave. But I pulled this directly from NPR. So he says, loneliness is linked or could be linked to a greater risk of cardiovascular disease. So this is a physical disease. Dementia, also a physical disease, depression, and anxiety. So, one way loneliness could kill you, like one way Brene Brown's claim of it being an earlier predictor of death than smoking and obesity and excessive drinking, well, physical disease can occur. Another way that death can occur from loneliness is suicide. And that's a topic that, again, is a very uncomfortable one for many people to face. But I'm going to go into that. I'm going to talk about some research that I pulled from the WHO, World Health Organization's data, which echoes the notion that loneliness is a breeding ground for disease and concludes that it's deadly. As of 2019, there were 800,000 suicide deaths globally, with suicidal behavior, that's a quote, being, quote, strongly associated to those who have a sense of isolation. So, long story short, isolation is connected to loneliness and suicide. What's further disturbing is that there is evidence that positively links isolation caused by strong feelings of shame to violence and murder. And that's a whole other rabbit hole. This is just a piece that I pulled from a paper I wrote recently in university on shame and guilt. But I mean, we're taking it. It's not only deadly, but it can also incite violence and the incentive to kill. So loneliness across the board, especially if there's shame and loneliness paired together, can lead to really ugly feelings and really bad outcomes, as we've just discussed here. Now, I do want to say that rejection itself is part of life. We can't mitigate it. We can't avoid it. My belief is that we need to build resilience to it to move forward through life. So all of this we need to face rejection, but this sort of deeper understanding of how scary loneliness is because of the correlations to death and violence and, disease. It's to say that it should or possibly could give us a deeper understanding of why rejection is so scary. Rejection is a fundamental core collective fear in all of us, whether we know it or not. And the fear of rejection doesn't, the fear of rejection, let's say, because of the possibility of rejection leading to loneliness, that doesn't mean that we're needy people. Needs and neediness are two different things. Super important to separate the two. But yeah, this fear of rejection and this essentially this fear of loneliness doesn't make us needy people. We are this way from a neurobiological standpoint. Like the need to be connected is hardwired in us, in our biology. And it's hardwired in us because our species survived by relying on group coordination. Like we got this far because of hunter and gatherers who relied on the cooperation of the community. We also have this neurobiological hardwiring because as an infant, we relied on our caretakers and a safe attachment to our the grown-ups that were taking care of us in order to survive. So this isn't just, we're weak. This is literally a part of our biology as a human species. So that's really important to acknowledge, because if we believe that the fear of rejection is weak, or the fear of loneliness is weak, or that loneliness in general is weak, we're only adding shame to the equation of loneliness. And we just discussed how dangerous that is, right? So very important that we understand clearly that loneliness can happen to all of us. The fear of rejection is also in all of us. It manifests in different ways for different reasons. And it doesn't mean we're weak. It means that we're human. I'm just going to read a comment here from Pat. He says, resilience is important. And as Janey said, we need to build it. It takes time. Be patient and understanding with yourself as you work to develop resiliency. Yeah. Huge, huge comment, Pat. Honestly, sometimes I wonder if the answer itself is just self-acceptance and patience. I love Alex all the time. Anytime she's feeling overwhelmed or sad or tired, she's like, okay, cool. Today is a rest and water day. The answer is always rest and water for her. And I love that because it's true. And in order to come to those terms, in order to admit that, let's say, you have to be really grounded in self-acceptance. Like, oh, here I am today. Another part of my human experience is showing up. And that part today is exhaustion, or that part today is loneliness, or that part today is dehydration or whatever. Right. And on that note, the water and rest thing, it's like, if we were dehydrated because we were out in the sun too long, or because we had a really aggressive workout in a hot yoga studio, would we think ourselves as weak because we were dehydrated? It's like, that's how our biology works. And so we need to start relaying that to loneliness. Loneliness is part of our biology, or rather the need for connection is part of our biology. So if as a byproduct of our need for connection is loneliness when we're not getting our social needs met, then it's the same thing as us being dehydrated from a biology standpoint because we didn't get our water needs met. So it's about self-compassion. That's such a huge theme in my life and my work, and I really appreciate that comment. Alex says, love a back to basics day. Rest and water is so healing. It's showing up for myself in a nurturing kind of compassion. Totally. Yeah. You teach me a lot about, like, do I just take a nap now? Or it's a game changer. It's a game changer. So yeah, we need to build resilience to rejection, and that requires self-acceptance. And I talked a little bit about that last week, and I talk a ton about that in my Fear to Fierce program. But I will be talking about that more on future lives, just because it's such a huge subject. And of course, today, if you have any questions or insights about that, please continue to fire that away in the chat. Okay, so let's get into what happens if you are lonely. Like, let's say you were rejected and you are lonely. Let's talk about the antidotes to loneliness. This was an interesting piece that I came across recently in my textbook in university. It says, in analyzing this closely, we're seeing. Oh, okay, so I have to give you context. I just pulled the quote because I was like, yeah, this. So there was a study by Cigna, and they let's say observed people's lifestyles and their communities and how connected they were to their communities. And in analyzing this closely, he says, we're seeing a lack of human connection, which ultimately leads to lack of vitality or a disconnect between mind and body. So earlier in the intro or earlier in this discussion, I mentioned that loneliness it's this sense of disconnection. And it's obviously this sense of disconnection from others, but it's also a disconnection from ourselves. And David M. Karandi, who's the president of Cigna, who conducted these studies on loneliness. And you can like literally Google that. It's again all over the web. I can also provide references. I lost my train of thought because I gave too much context. But basically, what he's saying is, so earlier in the discussion, I said it's disconnection from others. It's also disconnection from self. And he confirms that. He's saying here that the disconnection from self is actually the disconnection of mind and body. So like the disconnection of mind and body can invoke loneliness inside of us. And so the first thing I want to review in terms of the antidotes to loneliness are ways that we can connect our mind and body together again. And then I want to get into the social connection, which is sort of what you came here for. It's the big one. So I'm going to read a comment that just came through, and then we'll continue. Pat says, and we're all trying to work on multiple facets of ourselves at the same time. So that means we can't always give 100% to one area at all times. So again, patience is needed 100%. I don't know if you probably saw my stories the other day where I told the story of you only have two hands. It's a little short on my YouTube now. So if anyone wants to see it later, you can. But long story short, we only have two hands, and we need to respect that. Like if we try to have five hands, something's gonna give eventually. And I love challenging myself. I love seeing how far I can, like how much I can take on and how much I can accomplish. And I really push myself. But I also know what burnout feels like. And I also know that that's going to happen if I, go at full speed on all cylinders. Like it's just inevitable. So being patient and being smart enough to go like, all right, cool. This is starting to reach my edge. Let me scale back and go back to that place of connectedness in my mind and body. That's ultimate, because people say it's lonely at the top, and there's probably a reason for that. Okay, sure, you crushed all your goals and you have an awesome career, but like, who are you sharing that with if you're too busy to connect with others? Or, how healthy do you feel if you had no, ability to take care of yourself on the way up, right? So yeah, definitely, Pat, mind-body connection is so important and patience is needed. And Alex chimes in and says, I love that reel about only having two hands. It's so relevant for me this week. Same 100%. It's so, okay, it was so crazy when that guy said that. And just for context, I'll just tell you, I wasn't going to because I wanted to jump in, but I was carrying a bunch of groceries. Sorry for the ringing. I was carrying a bunch of groceries across the street, And this guy nearby looked at me and he started laughing and he was like, "You only have 2 hands." And at the time I was like, I just didn't get it. I was like, I'm not carrying that much. Like I was clearly carrying a lot, but I wasn't carrying that much, you know? I wish I had a way to turn that phone off, but it'll stop eventually. Anyway, it's so interesting. At the time, I didn't quite connect to it, but then eventually, you know, as days passed, I was like, maybe that was a metaphor. So yeah, samey. Okay, so let's talk about how we can connect our mind and our bodies. And I'm going to review this quicker because I want to spend more time on the social connection because like I said, that was sort of the main juice of this antidote to loneliness sort of concept. So connecting mind and body can look like many things. Probably some of them are going to be obvious. One of them being nature. There's actually substantial evidence that immersing ourselves specifically in green spaces can reduce stress levels literally within minutes. For me, it's green spaces, but also water, big bodies of water, as there are in Toronto. It's like I notice immediately. I mean, it's interesting because for me to get to big bodies of water, I have to like ride my bike or I walk there, and it's sort of like a journey out of the core of downtown into a more peaceful area. So it's hard for me to really quantify like how quickly I shift from sort of overwhelmed and stressed to like in peace because it kind of happens gradually. But I will say that once I'm on the in the area that I like to go, um, it is concretely noticeable. Like I'm viscerally aware of how much better I feel. And then if I spend like an hour or two there, when I come back downtown, it's night and day. Like it's the awareness of my physical, emotional, and mental dispositions from one place to the next are it's I mean, I know this is anecdotal, but it's totally night and day. And of course, we have evidence to back that up as well. So green spaces is key. Water. Now, if you don't have access to nature, and I don't always, you know, I'm not always able to like make the trek out to the peaceful places I like to go, you can also sort of include it in indoors. So you can have plants in your house. I actually bought this barnwood backdrop because it reminds me of a little bit of the country that I grew up in. And I mean, whatever, there's barnwood everywhere because there's farms and stuff. But yeah, it reminded me of sort of like an outdoor cabiny feel, and it made me feel better. And I have a little plant there in the background as well. So you can bring nature indoors. You can also listen to sounds, like have rainforest or ocean waves on in the background. Like literally almost all of the time I have ocean waves just in the background to drown out construction and like the children that live above me or whatever. And it's so helpful. Like me being able to control sound in my environment is the difference between me being okay and me being totally destabilized. So I highly recommend bringing nature into your home through sound. Something else that I was thinking about as I was putting this information together was because you can use a balcony, like you can have your coffee on your balcony or your porch if you live in a house. I don't have either of those things, but I do have a window. And there's one window in my house. I have a lot of windows in my apartment, but there's two windows that face the water. And sometimes I'll sit in one of my rooms and there's like two buildings on either side of this like one patch of water. And I'll just like laser focus on this patch of water while I'm drinking my coffee. And that it helps. It helps for me to zero my focus on nature, even though it's in the distance and there's buildings all around it. It's still helpful. So, I live directly downtown Toronto. If you guys have, access to like more gardens or balconies and things like that, it can help provide a similar effect of just being outside. But ultimately, green spaces like big parks, green spaces and water are the ultimate nature destination. And yeah, like I said, lots of evidence suggests that like your stress levels go down immediately, like within minutes. So it's a really, really good way to start to connect your body and your mind again. Another one I'll just rhyme off quickly is connecting to your values or your faith. So if you have a religion that you practice or some spiritual practice, that can also really help to ground your body and your mind together, to link them together. And that is true for me for sure. If I focus on chanting, like chanting and singing is a big ritual for me, that really helps to make me feel more connected to myself. Something that goes along the lines of values and faith is culture. Culture, just to be clear, encompasses language, religion, cuisine, social habits, music, and art. And in a place like Toronto, of course, this is a multicultural city. We have access to tons of different types of culture, and that can help us become connected because we learn about other people, and in turn, we learn about ourselves. But to take it further, roots or heritage, that is the culture that you originated from. So, or let's say heritage, or like your roots, essentially, because culture is something that is a byproduct of the reality of your environment, whereas roots and heritage are something that you were born with, essentially. So, like, connecting to the history of people from your past, or potentially, learning more about your ethnicity if you don't know much about it, or your nationality, or whatever it is that whatever it is that you have inside of you. I definitely need to do more of that. I need to connect more with my heritage and roots. I know I connect more with cultures that are not my roots and heritage because of the fact that I've been exposed to them more. I've spent more time with cultures and ethnicities and heritages that are not my own. But I do think it's useful to know about your own personal history. And there's things like DNA tests and stuff to just, learn about your history, learn about where you came from, and learn about those people's values and their art. And you might learn a lot about yourself that you didn't know, and it could really help you feel connected. So these are just ideas. Next is meaningful work and career. And if you don't have the option, if that's not possible to, the source of your money, if it can't be meaningful right now for whatever reason, then you can also find meaning in other things like creativity and hobbies and passion projects. Passion projects and hobbies and creativity can help us feel like we have something to live for. That's probably a broader conversation, but for me, my artistic endeavors has potentially kept me alive. It's been my be-all, end-all at times, and it's been extremely helpful and healing. It's also been something that I've put potentially too much weight into, and that was also not good because it became my identity, and we are more than what we do. And that's important to know, because if what we do is something we can no longer do, then who are we, right? So it's important that we separate our identity from what we're doing. But creativity, passion projects, art, hobbies, those types of things can really give us a sense of purpose and a sense of something to live for. On that note, and this is the last thing I'll say with respect to connecting, to like finding a sense of connectedness inward before we go outward. A big one is volunteering. There's something about the meaningful contribution that you give when you volunteer that brings a sense of purpose and meaning, and that you're part of this bigger picture, and that you belong. And this isn't to be like purpose and meaning aren't to be confused with worth. Your sense of worth should be kept different than, again, your purpose and the meaning that comes in your life. And that's because, again, your purpose can change, and the meaning that you find in life is defined by you. Ultimately, we put our own meaning into things. So we don't want to attach our identity and our worth to that, because those things can change. So worth is separate than purpose and meaning. So yeah, those are some ideas of how to find connectedness within yourself, connecting body and mind specifically, as the president of Cigna said before, and as I quoted earlier. And also, I just want to add this last thing before I get into the community. Quote from my textbook in university. It says, neurological studies show that engaging in purposeful and meaningful activities, such as creative pursuits, can work like a natural antidepressant by improving mood. That's a big statement. They're basically saying doing meaningful things is like a natural SSRI. And I agree. I mean, I agree with it anecdotally. They are always citing where they make these claims in the textbook. I didn't cite it, or I didn't pull the reference that they included, but I can if anyone's interested. But yeah, there's also lots of evidence online as well, just even in terms of like the value that volunteering brings to your life. So, check it out. Check out how meaning and purpose contributes to your well-being and your happiness and your health. Okay. Moving on to community. This is a big subject, and I'm super excited to talk about it. So all those external things that I just listed are all well and good. They are helpful. They are useful. They can empower us because we aren't relying on anyone else to get them. We can go walk in nature or be in nature without another person if we want to. But the problem is we're a social species. That's not the problem. It's not a problem. It's to say we're a social species and we need others. So it's great to have these tools where we can self-sustain ourselves and find connectedness there. But, we need relationships for survival. Relationships can actually help us prevent us from feeling isolated and can help prevent suicidal thoughts and behavior. Lots of evidence to back that up. And actually, individuals with a stronger social relationship not only have a higher likelihood of survival, they also have a longer life expectancy. So across the board, community and social connection is important for survival and longevity and life. So what can promote social disconnectedness? Sort of a lot of things, but I'm going to review a few. One is a big one. Too much time on social and on dating apps. So too much time on our phones, specifically for social media and dating apps. We have this misconstrued perspective that there's this abundance of availability of connection because of how many people are on social platforms and are on dating apps. And so that might, I'm not saying it will, but that might cause us to not try as hard to make that initial connection in real life. Or to not try at all, really. Let me just turn to my dating app. Let me just turn to my DMs, right? So if you're spending a substantial amount of time on dating apps and social platforms, and you're spending a substantial amount of time with in-person, in real life connections of quality relationships, as we talked about earlier, then you might be okay. So it's not to say that social media and dating apps are the problem. It's just to say that if you're replacing your real life connections with your social media and your dating apps, then you're going to have a problem. You're probably going to be lonely eventually. And it might present itself by way of denial initially. It might present itself by way of exhaustion or boredom, right? But eventually, those feelings are going to get more intense because your needs aren't being met. And you might turn to substance. This is another thing that can prevent us from finding adequate and quality social connection. And I understand that substance misuse and abuse are real things, and that adds another layer of complexity to this idea of, what could prevent us from building viable and quality social connections. So I understand that, and we're not going to talk about that right now. That is a whole other conversation. But let's put substance abuse disorder aside and just say in general that if you're turning to substance instead of going out there and finding connection, it's only going to perpetuate this cycle of disconnection. So some people will turn to substance because they feel lonely. And so they're trying to numb the loneliness. And that will only just inhibit them from actually finding the connection they need in real life, because they're potentially not even aware that that's what they need in real life. So they're just kind of numbing the problem rather than finding a solution. So that can inhibit our or perpetuate our social disconnectedness. The last one, which I already talked about, is hyperindependence. That can inhibit our social connectedness. Hyperindependence is not necessarily brave, actually. Hyperindependence can actually be a defense to rejection or a trauma response itself. And it can actually be, I don't want to say cowardly because that, I don't want it to be a negative thing, but hyperindependence can actually just be a defense mechanism, and it can prevent us from social connectedness. So yeah, it's interesting because I have compassion for hyperindependence. I am one of those people. But I guess it's to say I don't always know that that's the bravest route. Like sometimes it is. Sometimes to find your own way and to be the person that you wish you were with and to figure out how to, be self-reliant. I think that's brave. I think that's commendable. And I'm here for that. I do that myself. But is it always the answer? Like you have to have courage to share needs. Like you have to have the courage, when you're asking someone else to help share the remedy of your needs. You could remedy your needs yourself for the most part, or you could ask someone to help you remedy that. And I'm going to get into that in a few seconds with some closing remarks. So how can we improve our social connections? We can join a club. We can volunteer, as we talked about earlier. We can be the first one to reach out and ask to hang out. Whether it be a date or whether it be just a new friend, like a date or a friend date, whatever. We can be the first ones to reach out. And obviously, if you're the only one that's reaching out first all the time to make plans, then you need to set a boundary and probably move on. That's not a healthy relationship as far as I'm concerned. But to take the chance and be the first to reach out for new relationships or for dates or even within friendships, like there's nothing wrong with that. And it's going to lead to more connection when you're reaching out and asking for connection with other people who also want connection. So it's like a dog whistle to, your people. If you're trying to be more connected, you're eventually going to find people that also want to be more connected in real life. All of these things involve courage, right? As I was talking about before, it takes courage because we can be rejected. We can be left out. We can be left behind. But the risk of not reaching out, the risk of staying isolated, especially when we're lonely and we want connection, can be deadly. Or at the very least, it can lead to really deep symptoms of physical illness and mental illness, symptoms and or expressions. So having said that, let's talk about the rewards of community. Sharing a life with others helps bring meaning and purpose. Have you ever noticed that when you're with a quality relationship, you don't post on social as much, or like you don't post on your stories? Because when we post on our stories, we're trying to we're trying to share our lives with people. We're essentially trying to get connection, right? But it's interesting, at least for me, when I'm with my al pal, I forget about my phone altogether pretty much. And then every now and then I'm like, oh, we should post because we're doing this thing that we need to inform people. We're going live, so we should post a picture of us together and or whatever. So Alex says rewards of community, long walks, and friendship rings. Oh, yeah. Yeah, man. I got mine on. We have friendship rings, and that makes us feel connected when we're apart. I mean, it's silly. You might think it's silly, or you might think it's little girlish or whatever, but like this symbol helps us. Like I think about her every time I look at it, and it helps me feel like it reminds me of her love for me and the love I have for her, and that makes me feel good inside. Will this ring, like, does it replace Alex? No, but it's to say, these these symbols rather can remind us of the special people that we have in our lives. But yeah, the rewards of community, right? Like sharing our lives with people is very rewarding. Another reward is increased level of happiness and reduced levels of stress. We talked about that earlier. Belonging, a sense of belonging when there's others present in your life and you have close others. Like, again, if the belonging is truly belonging and not fitting in. Like we talked last week about how rejection just sucks all around. Like it doesn't feel good for being rejected for any reason. It hurts. But it doesn't feel much better when you're accepted for a version of yourself that isn't real. Like I say that hurts too, especially if I'm aware that I'm not being myself and that's the thing I'm getting praised for or whatever. Yeah, because you're not going to be able to sustain that. And eventually, if you contorted yourself to get the thing, to get the attention, to get the praise, you're going to have to keep contorting yourself to keep it. So that sucks. That hurts. I'm going to read a comment here. Alex says, me too. It makes me feel so good. It reminds me to stay strong and keep my heart open. Yeah, same. Okay, my closing remarks, because I don't want to keep you guys too late. So RuPaul, if you know him, it's him when he's out of drag, her when she's in drag. But he has this saying that goes like this: if you can't learn to love yourself, how in the hell you're going to learn to love anybody else? And then he follows it up with, can I get an amen? I think this is true for the most part. But what this doesn't mean is that we can't receive love from people before we learn to love ourselves. In fact, I think that our communities can teach us how to love ourselves. So I actually don't know that I believe the narrative, we can't truly receive love from others until we've learned to love ourselves. I don't believe that, actually. So not only do I think that our community can help us teach us how to love ourselves, they can shine the light that they see from us back into our own eyes like a mirror. Like they can reflect our worth back to us. And while this isn't their job, and it shouldn't be an expectation, it shouldn't be our expectation that they do this, because that can lead to unmet expectations, which is different than unmet needs. So while it isn't their job, and while we shouldn't be expecting them to reflect our worth back to us, it can be extremely healing when that does happen. So I don't believe that we need to learn to love ourselves all on our own. I think it's important to be self-reliant and self-efficient and, be able to take care of ourselves. But I don't believe that we have to learn to love ourselves all on our own. And it's because we can't always see the hidden beauty that are in our blind spots that the ones we love can see so clearly. And again, anecdotally, I can say this is true. I can say that there has been days or periods in my life where I have felt worthless. And it's been my community who's like grabbed my cheeks and shook my head and said, you got to trust us. Like, we love you for you because you're worthy. You got to trust us. You're a well of knowledge and you have a lot to offer the world. You got to trust us. You're deserving of our love. Otherwise, we wouldn't love you. Like, you got to trust us. We love you with nothing. And so, yeah, we need to learn to love ourselves with nothing ultimately, because with nothing is really truly who we are underneath it all. It's just this bare, vulnerable, beautiful soul, if you will, spirit or core essence. But yeah, as much as we need to learn how to do that ourselves, we can also learn to do that from others, from our close others, the ones who love us and the ones who see that in us, and they can remind us of it, and they can teach us how to find that in ourselves. So community is key. And I just saw Alex's comment and she's like, and I'm crying. Yeah, man. Well, your love for me makes me cry. So thanks for that. This is just to get you back, I guess. Yeah. So you guys, thank you so much for showing up tonight. This was a really difficult conversation to have. It was difficult putting all the information together and just forcing myself to think about all this. It's uncomfortable, but we're doing this together, and it really, really helps to do this together. And yeah, again, if there's any questions or comments or insights or anything you want to add before we wrap up, here you go. I'm gonna finish off this episode by informing you that I do one-on-one coaching. I'm taking on 2 new clients right now. I have limited time because I'm in university and I'm doing a lot of public coaching and, creating and entrepreneur and business and all of that. But it lights my soul on fire to work one-on-one with people and to be able to curate the knowledge that I've accumulated from my psychology studies and trauma studies and help real people in real time apply that to their lives. So one-on-one coaching is an option. You can reach me through email, through DM, whether it be in Facebook or Instagram. I also have a program called Fear to Fierce on my website, and you can do it one-on-one with me, or you can DIY it. You can do it yourself, and it covers a ton of stuff that we talked about. Or rather, the subject that we talked about tonight is in the program more in depth. And yeah, it saved me. Like, creating this program saved, because I put myself through it before I let anyone else through it. So just wanted to inform you of those things. Last but not least, I have a special surprise for you tonight. Coming out on Instagram is a new piece of media that my filmmaking team and I created. It's a short story. It's like only a few minutes long. And yeah, we're one of my passion projects, which we talked about the value of passion projects and the meaning they bring to life, earlier in the chat. So check it out. It's going to launch in 30 minutes. So at 9 p.m., we're going to release this thing. We're really excited. We worked really hard on it. And yeah, I can't wait to see what you guys think about it. So yeah, check out my Instagram, Janey B World, to see the story that we are releasing tonight on my IGTV. And you can see the brilliance of my creative team, Paja, who is also known as Ball Canada, and Jeremy DuPont. Just epic team to work with. I'm so stoked. And yeah, thanks again, everyone. You guys have been awesome. Alex says, I'm so excited to see it. I'm so excited to share it. Yay. Definitely also let me know in the comments or in DM if there's any subjects that you guys want me to talk about, because I'm here to serve you ultimately. So would definitely love to know what you want me to talk more about. And I'll be sure to keep that in mind in the future lives to come. You guys, take care, be kind to yourself, and reach out to someone that you love tonight. I challenge you. Love you.